The carriage, a modest affair compared to the glittering equipages that usually grace the drive, crunched over the frosted gravel of Castlewood Manor. Lady Seraphina Beaumont, nestled within its confines, felt a familiar tightening in her chest, not from the chill of the late autumn air, but from the daunting task that lay before her. She was here, ostensibly, to assist with the Yuletide Ball, a grand affair meant to restore the luster to the Ashworth name. In truth, she was a quiet balm, dispatched to soothe the lingering sting of her cousin, Lady Clarissa Beaumont's scandalous departure. Clarissa. The name alone caused a ripple of unease through the ton and undoubtedly through the hallowed halls of Castlewood. Just weeks prior, the dazzling Clarissa had, with a flourish of her hand and a whisper of changed affections, jilted Lord Julian Ashworth, Earl of Castlewood, leaving him not only heartbroken, but publicly humiliated. The gossip, as Seraphina knew from the latest edition of Lady Thistlewick's chronicles, had been nothing short of a tempest. Lady Thistlewick was quick to distribute a special edition on the Ashworth affair. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles, Special Edition, The Ashworth Affair. My dear readers, the ton is agog. Lady Clarissa Beaumont's abrupt departure from Castlewood Manor leaves Lord Ashworth bereft and the engagement coffers untouched. One wonders what grander prize the cunning Clarissa seeks, or if the Earl's famously stoic countenance simply proved too dull for our vivacious butterfly. A pity, for the Ashworth lineage demands a vibrant countess, not a wilting wallflower. Seraphina, in her simple travelling gown of sky blue, felt every inch the wallflower Lady Thistlewick might describe. She was not Clarissa, with her dazzling wit and audacious beauty. Seraphina possessed a quiet grace, a keen observation, and a talent that, while profound, was rarely showcased beyond the confines of her late father's modest music room. Master Elias Beaumont, a revered music tutor to the gentry, had instilled in her a love for harmony and a belief in the strength found within sound. But such virtues, her pragmatic mother, Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont, often reminded her, did not secure a suitable match in society. The carriage drew to a halt. A footman, looking rather more solemn than was customary for a festive season, opened the door. Seraphina stepped out, her gaze sweeping over the imposing grey stone of Castlewood Manor, its windows like watchful eyes. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Inside, the silence of the grand hall was almost oppressive, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock. A formidable figure emerged from the shadows, the Dowager Countess of Castlewood, Lord Julian's mother. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over Seraphina, lingering perhaps a moment too long on the unadorned simplicity of her attire. Lady Seraphina, the Dowager Countess's voice was a precise, cool instrument. We trust your journey was uneventful. There was an unspoken question, a veiled insinuation of Seraphina's connection to the recent scandal. Quite uneventful, Countess, Seraphina replied, her voice soft but steady. I am most grateful for your hospitality. Before the Dowager Countess could offer another thinly veiled barb, a tall, imposing figure descended the grand staircase. Lord Julian Ashworth. His presence filled the hall, a palpable aura of contained intensity. His dark hair, usually impeccably styled, seemed a touch disheveled, and his eyes, though piercing, held a weariness that spoke volumes of his recent ordeal. He was handsome, in a severe, classical way, like a statue carved from stone. He paused halfway down the stairs, his gaze meeting Seraphina's. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition, only a polite, almost detached acknowledgement. Lady Seraphina, welcome to Castlewood. His voice was deep, resonant, yet devoid of emotion. He was a man who had built walls around his heart, and Clarissa's departure had only cemented them further. Seraphina felt a pang of unexpected empathy. Her task, she realized, was far more delicate than merely arranging ribbons and calling cards. She was to navigate the echoes of a jilted heart, a formidable dowager, and the ever-present, ink-stained gaze of Lady Thistlewick. Days at Castlewood Manor unfolded with a quiet, almost melancholic rhythm. Seraphina found herself immersed in the minutiae of ball preparations, a flurry of silks, floral arrangements, and guest lists. She moved through the grand rooms, a quiet presence, observing the subtle undercurrents of the household. The servants, while respectful, carried an air of hushed sympathy for their master. The Dowager Countess, ever vigilant, watched Seraphina with an almost hawk-like intensity, her disapproval a constant, chilling breeze. Lord Julian, meanwhile, remained a distant, enigmatic figure. He would appear at meals, offer polite, clipped remarks, and then retreat to his study, lost in ledgers and estate matters. Seraphina saw him occasionally in the gardens, walking with a brisk, purposeful stride, his head bowed as if carrying an invisible burden. She longed to offer solace, but knew her place. She was merely the cousin, the quiet assistant, a shadow in the wake of Clarissa's dazzling, destructive light. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the Dowager Countess's pointed suggestions regarding the placement of the punch bowl, Seraphina wandered into the manor's neglected music room. Dust motes danced in the shafts of weak sunlight filtering through the tall windows. In the corner, a grand piano, its lid closed, seemed to sigh with disuse. Seraphina's fingers hitched. She longed for the familiar comfort of the keys, the way the music could speak when words failed. She hesitated. Then, unable to resist, gently lifted the lid. The ivory keys, yellowed with age, gleamed softly. She sat, her heart a quiet flutter, and her fingers, almost instinctively, found a familiar melody, a simple, poignant air her father had composed, one that spoke of quiet longing and enduring hope. The notes, tentative at first, filled the silent room, a soft, ethereal whisper. She closed her eyes, allowing the music to flow through her, a balm to her own anxieties. She did not hear him enter. That is, unexpectedly beautiful. Seraphina's eyes flew open. Lord Julian stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the fading light. His usual stern expression was softened, almost vulnerable, a hint of something akin to wonder in his eyes. He had been drawn by the melody, like a moth to a flame. Seraphina's cheeks flushed. "My apologies, my lord. I did not realize the room was occupied. I merely could not resist." Julian stepped further into the room, his gaze fixed on her, then on the piano. "It is a melody I have never heard before. It speaks of solace." He paused, a flicker of emotion crossing his face before it was quickly masked. "My mother informs me you are quite adept with the violin as well." Seraphina nodded, her heart quickening. "Indeed, my lord. It was my father's primary instrument, and thus mine." A thoughtful silence descended, broken only by the distant caw of a rook. Julian's gaze drifted to the grand piano, then back to Seraphina. "The Yuletide Ball requires a new waltz, something memorable. My mother insists upon a piece that speaks of the season of renewal, but I confess the usual compositions seem inadequate." He looked at her, a direct, searching gaze that made her breath catch. "Would you consider composing it, Lady Seraphina? The Castlewood cadenza?" The request hung in the air, a delicate, fragile thing. It was an honor, a challenge, and a terrifying invitation. To compose for him, for Castlewood, for the very ball that would decide his future. It was a collaboration that could either elevate her or expose her to the ton's harshest scrutiny. And, of course, Lady Thistlewick's latest dispatch on the matter. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles, Whispers from the West. My dear readers, curiouser and curiouser. Whispers from Castlewood suggest Lord Ashworth finds solace not in society's glittering embrace, but in the quiet melodies of his cousin by marriage. Could a new tune be playing for the Jilted Earl? Or is this merely a temporary distraction before the dazzling Lady Clarissa makes her grand return? One awaits, with bated breath, to see which melody will win the Earl's ear and his heart. Seraphina met his gaze, a quiet resolve settling within her. This was not just about a waltz. It was about a connection, a shared understanding that transcended the polite formalities of society. "I would be honored, my lord," she said, her voice steady. "I would be honored to compose the Castlewood cadenza." The first note of their collaboration had been struck, and somewhere Lady Thistlewick sharpened her quill. The commission to compose the Castlewood cadenza transformed Seraphina's days. The dusty music room, once a sanctuary for solitary reflection, now buzzed with a quiet, purposeful energy. Julian, true to his word, made himself available for their daily consultations, though his initial demeanor remained one of polite, almost clinical, detachment. Their first few sessions were a study in contrasts. Julian, accustomed to the rigid structures of estate management, approached music with the precision of a mathematician. He spoke of tempo and rhythm as if they were figures in a ledger, his suggestions practical, if uninspired. Seraphina, however, saw music as a living, breathing entity, a language of emotion. "Perhaps, my lord," Seraphina ventured one crisp morning, her fingers hovering over the piano keys, "we might consider a more flowing transition here. The current phrasing feels abrupt, like a conversation cut short." Julian, seated opposite her, his brow furrowed over a sheet of musical notation, looked up. "Abrupt? It is efficient, Lady Seraphina, a clear progression from one movement to the next. But a waltz, my lord, is a dance of grace, of intertwining steps. Should not the music reflect that fluidity?" She played the passage, first as written, then with the seamless legato she envisioned. The difference was immediate and profound. The notes, once staccato and formal, now wove together like silk ribbons. Julian leaned forward, a flicker of something akin to surprise in his eyes. "Indeed," he conceded, his voice softer than usual, "I see your meaning. It is more evocative." And so, their collaboration began to unfold. Seraphina found herself gently challenging Julian's rigid perceptions, coaxing him to listen, not just with his mind, but with his heart. She spoke of the subtle shifts in emotion, the yearning in a rising crescendo, the quiet comfort in a descending chord. Julian, in turn, offered a grounding presence, his questions often forcing her to articulate the abstract beauty of her compositions into tangible forms. He would observe her intently as she played, his gaze tracing the movements of her hands, the subtle expressions on her face. Slowly, imperceptibly, the walls around him began to soften. One afternoon, as Seraphina hummed a new melodic phrase, Julian surprised her by picking up a forgotten cello in the corner of the room. He tuned it with practiced ease, and then, to her astonishment, began to play a counter-melody, a deep, resonant hum that perfectly complemented her tune. His fingers, usually so stiff, moved with a surprising dexterity. "You play, my lord?" Seraphina asked, genuinely surprised. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "A childhood diversion. My mother deemed it an acceptable pursuit for a fine young gentleman, so long as it did not interfere with more pressing matters." His voice held a faint, self-deprecating humor. "I found it a useful escape." For the next hour, they played together, the piano and cello weaving a delicate tapestry of sound. The music room, once a place of quiet solitude, now resonated with a shared purpose, a burgeoning understanding that transcended their stations. Seraphina found herself laughing, a light, unrestrained sound, as Julian stumbled over a particularly intricate passage, and he, in turn, offered a rare, genuine smile. Their growing closeness did not, however, escape the notice of the Dowager Countess. She would often make unexpected appearances, ostensibly to check on ball preparations, but her eyes always lingered on Julian and Seraphina, a look of thinly veiled disapproval. "Julian, my dear," she announced one day, sweeping into the music room with an air of grand pronouncement, "I have just received a most delightful communication. Lady Clarissa Beaumont has returned to London. She has expressed the most profound regret for her regrettable indiscretion and wishes to make amends. She will, of course, be attending the Yuletide Ball. Indeed, I have extended an invitation for her to stay here at Castlewood for the duration of the festivities." The words hung in the air, a sudden, jarring discord. Seraphina's fingers froze on the keys. Julian's smile vanished, replaced by the familiar mask of stoicism. The Dowager Countess, oblivious or uncaring, beamed. "It is, after all, only proper," she continued, her gaze pointedly flicking to Seraphina. "A family affair, wouldn't you agree, Lady Seraphina? And such a charming opportunity for old acquaintances to rekindle their understanding." Seraphina felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Clarissa, here, the harmony they had begun to build, felt suddenly fragile, threatened by the very presence of the woman who had shattered Julian's world once before. Lady Thistlewick, ever vigilant, was quick to seize upon this new development. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles, London's latest larks. My dear readers, hold on to your bonnets. Lady Clarissa Beaumont, having apparently tired of her grand tour, has reappeared on the London scene, her sights reportedly set once more on the eligible Earl of Castlewood. One hears whispers of profound regret and a desire to mend fences. Will the Jilted Earl forgive? And one must wonder, what becomes of the quiet cousin who has, until now, provided such melodious distraction? One awaits with bated breath to see which melody will win the Earl's ear and his heart. Clarissa's arrival at Castlewood Manor was, as expected, a spectacle. She descended from her carriage like a vision in pink and gold, her gown perfectly cut, her smile radiant, her every movement a calculated performance. The Dowager Countess greeted her with an almost effusive embrace, a stark contrast to Seraphina's own reserved welcome. Julian, though outwardly composed, seemed to stiffen at Clarissa's presence, his eyes holding a guarded wariness that Seraphina recognized as a lingering wound. "Julian, my dearest," Clarissa exclaimed, her voice a melodious chime. She extended a gloved hand, which he took with a polite but brief squeeze. "You cannot imagine how I have longed to return to Castlewood. My absence was a regrettable folly. I have come to realize the true value of what I so foolishly cast aside." Her gaze, however, flickered to Seraphina, a fleeting, almost imperceptible glint of triumph in her eyes. Seraphina, standing slightly apart, felt her presence diminish. Clarissa, with her effortless charm and dazzling beauty, commanded every eye, every ear. She was the sun, and Seraphina, the moon, reflecting a borrowed light. The Dowager Countess wasted no time in orchestrating opportunities for Clarissa and Julian to reconnect. There were long walks through the frosty gardens, ostensibly to discuss the ball, but always with Clarissa's hand tucked into Julian's arm. There were evenings spent in the drawing room, where Clarissa regaled them with amusing anecdotes from her travels, her laughter bright and infectious, often drawing Julian into a rare, genuine chuckle. Seraphina would sit quietly, observing, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Clarissa, however, was not content with merely charming Julian. She sought to subtly undermine Seraphina at every turn. "Seraphina, my dear," Clarissa purred one afternoon, as Seraphina was arranging a particularly intricate floral display. "How industrious you are! So very practical." "I confess, I always found such domestic pursuits rather tiresome. But then, not all of us are blessed with a large dowry, are we? One must find other ways to be useful." Her words, delivered with a sweet smile, were a poisoned dart. Seraphina felt the sting, but merely offered a polite, non-committal reply. "I find beauty in all forms, Clarissa." Later that day, Seraphina sought out her mother, Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont, who had arrived to oversee some last-minute dress fittings. Eleanor, with her gentle eyes and practical wisdom, was a comforting presence. "Oh, Seraphina," Eleanor sighed, smoothing the fabric of a gown. "Clarissa is quite the force of nature, isn't she? I confess I had hoped she would remain elsewhere." "She is determined to reclaim Julian," Seraphina said, her voice low, "and the Dowager Countess is aiding her at every turn. I feel as if I am merely a temporary diversion, a placeholder, until Clarissa decides to grace him with her presence once more." "Nonsense, child," Eleanor said, though her expression was troubled. "Julian sought you out for the waltz, did he not? That speaks volumes. Your talent, Seraphina, is a truer asset than any fleeting charm. But you must be careful, my love. Titled men, particularly those of Lord Julian's standing, are often swayed by ambition and expectation. Do not entangle your heart where it might be bruised." Despite the growing tension, Seraphina and Julian continued their work on the Castlewood Cadenza. These sessions became Seraphina's anchor, a refuge from the social games being played around her. Julian, though often distracted by Clarissa's demands, would always return to their music room, his focus sharpening the moment Seraphina's fingers touched the keys. One evening, as they worked late, refining a particularly complex passage, Clarissa swept in, draped in a shimmering evening gown, her eyes bright with feigned concern. "Still at it?" she chirped, her voice a little too loud. "Julian, my dearest, you promised to join me for a game of whist. And Seraphina, surely you must be exhausted. You look quite pale." She made a show of patting Seraphina's arm, her touch fleeting and insincere. Julian, who had been leaning over Seraphina's shoulder, straightening a sheet of music, straightened fully. "We are nearly finished, Clarissa. The cadenza requires our full attention." His tone was firm, a subtle rebuke. Clarissa's smile tightened, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, darling. Art demands sacrifice, does it not? Just ensure it is worth the sacrifice." She lingered for a moment longer, her gaze lingering on the sheet music, a calculating glint in her eyes, before finally departing. Seraphina shivered. Clarissa's presence was a chill wind, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame they were nurturing. And, of course, Lady Thistlewick's latest dispatch on the matter. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles, the love triangle of Castlewood. My dear readers, the plot thickens at Castlewood Manor. Lady Clarissa Beaumont's dramatic return has set tongues wagging and hearts aflutter. Will the Jilted Earl succumb once more to her dazzling charms? Or will the quiet, musical cousin, Lady Seraphina, prove to be a more enduring melody? One observes with keen interest the Dowager Countess's fervent efforts to reunite the former pair, while the younger Lady Beaumont continues to compose her cadenza in the shadows. A true battle of wills, and perhaps of hearts, is unfolding before our very eyes. Who will claim the Earl's hand? Only time and Lady Thistlewick will tell. The pressure mounted with each passing day. The Yuletide Ball loomed, a glittering stage upon which the fate of Castlewood, and perhaps Seraphina's own heart, would be decided. The cadenza, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a fragile shield against the encroaching storm. The days leading up to the Yuletide Ball were a whirlwind of activity, yet for Seraphina, they felt increasingly like a slow, agonizing countdown. Clarissa, now firmly ensconced at Castlewood, exerted her influence with practiced ease. She monopolized Julian's time, drawing him into lively conversations at the dinner table, suggesting impromptu rides through the estate, and even, to Seraphina's dismay, offering assistance with the ball preparations, which inevitably led to more work for Seraphina and the staff. The Dowager Countess, naturally, championed Clarissa's every move. "Such vivacity, Julian," she would declare, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Lady Clarissa truly brings light back into these halls. A countess must possess such spirit, must she not?" Julian would offer a non-committal hum, his gaze often drifting towards Seraphina, who would be quietly overseeing the placement of a garland or correcting a misfiled guest list. These fleeting glances, however, were enough to sustain Seraphina, a secret language between them amidst the din of Clarissa's charm. Their musical sessions continued, though they became increasingly difficult to schedule. Clarissa would often interrupt, feigning a sudden need for Julian's opinion on a trivial matter, or simply to draw him away with a playful tug on his sleeve. Yet, when they did manage to steal moments alone in the music room, the outside world seemed to fade. "This passage here," Julian murmured one afternoon, his voice low, his head bent close to Seraphina's as they reviewed the cadenza. "It feels melancholic. Is that your intention, Lady Seraphina?" Seraphina paused, her fingers resting on the keys. "Perhaps a touch, my lord. It speaks of a longing, a quiet hope that something lost might yet be found." She glanced at him, her heart aching with the unspoken meaning. Julian's eyes met hers, and for a moment the guardedness in his gaze softened, revealing a depth of understanding that sent a shiver down Seraphina's spine. "A longing," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I believe I understand." The matter of gowns for the ball became another subtle battleground. Seraphina's mother, Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont, had arrived with a newly fashioned gown for Seraphina, a lovely but simple gown adorned with delicate lace at the sleeves. It was elegant, yet understated, a testament to Eleanor's careful budgeting. "It is beautiful, Mamma," Seraphina said, turning before the looking-glass. "But perhaps too plain for Castlewood." Eleanor patted her hand. "Nonsense, child. Your beauty requires no elaborate embellishments. True elegance lies in simplicity. Besides," she added, her voice dropping, "it would not do to outshine your cousin, would it? Best to remain discreet." Clarissa, of course, had spared no expense. Her gown, a confection of shimmering rose and gold, arrived from London in a trunk large enough to house a small pony. She paraded it before them at tea, twirling to show off its intricate embroidery and layers of costly tulle. "Is it not divine?" Clarissa cooed, casting a triumphant glance at Seraphina's modest forest green fabric, which lay folded on a nearby chair. "One simply must make an impression, particularly when one has been so remiss." She smiled sweetly at Julian, who merely nodded, his expression unreadable. The evening before the ball, Seraphina went to retrieve her gown from the pressing room. To her dismay, she found a small but noticeable tear along the hem, and a faint, oily stain on the delicate lace of one sleeve. It was not enough to ruin the gown entirely, but it was enough to cause distress, enough to make her feel acutely aware of her disadvantaged position. She suspected Clarissa's hand, a subtle, cruel reminder of her place, Her mother, seeing her distress, quickly set about mending the tear and attempting to remove the stain. "It will be barely noticeable, my love," Eleanor assured her, though her lips were pressed into a thin line. "Some people, Seraphina, find joy in dimming the light of others. But your light, my dear, shines from within." "Thanks, Mama." That night, alone in her room, Seraphina felt a wave of despair. How could she compete? Clarissa had everything: beauty, connections, the Dowager Countess's favor, and now even the physical manifestation of her triumph in her opulent gown. Seraphina's only solace was the music, the unfinished cadenza that pulsed within her, a secret shared with Julian. Lady Thistlewick, ever with her ear to the ground, had already caught wind of the pre-ball theatrics. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles. Pre-ball buzz. My dear readers, the Yuletide Ball at Castlewood promises to be the event of the season, not least for the dramatic unveiling of Lady Clarissa Beaumont's return to society. One hears her gown alone cost a king's ransom, a stark contrast to the quiet simplicity of her cousin, Lady Seraphina. Whispers abound regarding a certain accident to Lady Seraphina's ball gown. A most unfortunate mishap, surely. Will the modest bloom wilt in the shadow of the dazzling rose? Or does the quiet lady possess a hidden strength yet to be revealed? The stage is set, dear readers, for a most intriguing performance. The night of the Yuletide Ball dawned crisp and clear, the air alive with the promise of snow and the distant peal of church bells. Inside Castlewood Manor, the transformation was complete. The great hall, usually so austere, now glittered with thousands of candles, their flames dancing off polished marble and gilded frames. Garlands of holly and ivy draped every archway, and the scent of pine and cinnamon mingled with the expensive perfumes of arriving guests. Carriages began to arrive in a steady stream, their occupants, the crème de la crème of the ton, spilling forth in a riot of silks, jewels, and powdered wigs. The air hummed with excited chatter, the rustle of gowns, and the occasional sharp burst of laughter. Every eye, Seraphina knew, would be assessing, judging, and most importantly, seeking out the latest morsel for Lady Thistlewick's hungry quill. Seraphina, dressed in her mended dark green gown, felt a familiar tremor of nerves. Her mother had done wonders, but the faint stain and the carefully stitched hem were still visible to her own critical eye. She descended the grand staircase, a quiet ripple in the vibrant tapestry of the arriving guests. She saw Julian at the foot of the stairs, greeting guests with the Dowager Countess at his side. He looked impossibly handsome in his formal evening attire, his dark coat a stark contrast to his pale cravat. His gaze swept the descending crowd, and for a fleeting moment it met hers. A subtle nod, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and then he turned back to a bowing duke. Clarissa, of course, made her entrance precisely when the hall was at its most crowded, ensuring maximum impact. She floated down the staircase, a vision in rose and gold, her gown shimmering under the candlelight, her every movement designed to capture attention. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. She was breathtaking, undeniably so. The Dowager Countess beamed, her hand resting proudly on Clarissa's arm as they reached the bottom. "My dearest Julian," Clarissa purred, her voice carrying across the hall. "I trust I am not too late." She offered him a dazzling smile, and Seraphina saw Julian offer a polite, if somewhat strained, smile in return. The ball officially began, and the grand ballroom filled with the swirl of dancers. Seraphina found herself politely engaged in conversation with a series of amiable, if unremarkable gentlemen, all the while acutely aware of Julian's presence across the room. He danced dutifully with a succession of eligible young ladies, but his gaze, Seraphina noticed, often strayed towards the musician's dais, where the orchestra was preparing for the evening's main performance. Clarissa, meanwhile, was the undisputed belle of the ball. She danced with Julian, their movements fluid and practiced, a picture of effortless elegance. As they waltzed past Seraphina, Clarissa leaned in close to Julian, whispering something that made him offer a faint, almost forced, chuckle. Her eyes, however, darted to Seraphina, a smirk playing on her lips. Later, as Seraphina stood near a potted palm, seeking a moment of quiet, she overheard a snippet of conversation between two elderly ladies. "Such a pity about poor Lady Seraphina's gown," one whispered, fanning herself delicately. "One hears it was quite damaged. So unfortunate just before the ball." "Indeed," the other replied, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Though one must admit it hardly matters when one is competing with Lady Clarissa. Such a dazzling creature, and so perfectly suited to the Earl. Wouldn't you agree? After all, he needs a countess who can truly shine." The words were a familiar echo of the Dowager Countess's sentiments, and they stung. Seraphina straightened her shoulders, reminding herself of Eleanor's words. "Your beauty requires no elaborate embellishments. True elegance lies in simplicity. Your talent, Seraphina, is a truer asset than any fleeting charm." Just then, Julian appeared at her side, his presence a sudden, welcome anchor in the swirling chaos. "Lady Seraphina," he said, his voice low, "I trust you are enjoying the festivities." "As much as one can, my lord," she replied, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "The decorations are truly magnificent." He nodded, but his gaze was serious. "The orchestra is preparing. Are you ready?" Seraphina felt a fresh wave of nerves, but also a surge of excitement. "As I will ever be, my lord." He looked at her then, a long, searching look that seemed to strip away the layers of societal artifice. "I have every faith in you, Lady Seraphina, more than you know." His words were a quiet promise, a profound declaration that bypassed the need for grand pronouncements. A hush began to fall over the ballroom as the conductor raised his baton. The moment for the Castlewood cadenza was upon them. Seraphina's heart pounded, not just with anticipation for the music, but with the weight of Julian's unspoken trust. And, of course, Lady Thistlewick's final pre-performance bulletin, Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles. The grand unveiling. My dear readers, the Yuletide Ball is in full swing, and the air is thick with anticipation. Lady Clarissa Beaumont, a vision in rose and gold, has clearly captivated the Earl of Castlewood, as predicted. However, one hears whispers of a peculiar musical commission, a cadenza, composed by the quiet Lady Seraphina Beaumont herself. Will this unconventional choice prove a stroke of genius or a disastrous misstep? Will the Earl's heart be swayed by grand spectacle or a quiet melody? The moment of truth approaches, dear readers. Prepare yourselves for the grand unveiling. Seraphina took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the orchestra. The fate of the cadenza, and perhaps her own future, lay in the notes about to be played. A collective hush fell over the ballroom as the conductor, a gentleman with a perpetually worried expression, raised his baton. Seraphina stood near the edge of the dais, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The first notes of the Castlewood cadenza swelled through the air, a delicate, hopeful melody, exactly as she and Julian had composed it. A wave of relief washed over her. The music was beautiful, a testament to their shared understanding. Julian, standing near the grand entrance with his mother and Clarissa, had his eyes fixed on Seraphina. A flicker of pride, she thought, crossed his face. Clarissa, however, watched with a calculating glint, her smile a little too fixed. The waltz progressed, weaving its intricate path through the ballroom. Couples began to take to the floor, their movements graceful, mirroring the music. Seraphina felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the melody, but to Julian, who had trusted her with this moment. Then, it happened. As the orchestra reached the central, most poignant section of the cadenza, the part Seraphina had intended to convey, a quiet longing, a jarring discord ripped through the air. A sudden, unexpected crescendo, too loud, too aggressive, followed by a frantic, almost frantic acceleration of tempo. The delicate longing was replaced by a harsh, almost mournful clamor, a cacophony that made several dancers stumble. Seraphina's eyes darted to the conductor. His face was a mask of confusion, his baton wavering. Her gaze then fell upon the sheet music on the stand before the first violinist. It was subtly different. A few hastily scribbled notes, a changed dynamic marking. Clarissa. It had to be Clarissa. She must have slipped in during the pre-performance bustle, a subtle act of sabotage designed to expose Seraphina's raw emotions and make her composition sound amateurish, a melodramatic outburst rather than a nuanced expression. A wave of humiliation washed over Seraphina. Her carefully crafted cadenza, the embodiment of her and Julian's shared journey, was being twisted into a mockery. She felt the eyes of the ton upon her, their whispers beginning to rise above the now stumbling music. The Dowager Countess's triumphant smirk was a dagger to her heart. But then, a voice echoed in her mind, her father's voice. "Find strength through sound, my dear. Music is not merely notes on a page. It is the spirit that breathes life into them." Seraphina took a deep breath. She could let the music devolve into chaos, confirming Clarissa's unspoken accusations. Or she could fight. Her gaze met Julian's across the room. He was watching her, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. In that moment, she saw not the Jilted Earl, but the man who had shared quiet moments of creation with her, the man who had trusted her. With a sudden, fierce resolve, Seraphina moved. She stepped onto the dais, her simple gown a stark contrast to the opulent finery around her. The conductor, startled, looked at her. Seraphina, without a word, reached for the first violinist's bow, her fingers brushing his. She took the lead, her own violin, which she had brought with her, now clutched firmly in her hand. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, allowing the true melody of the cadenza to well up within her. Then she began to play. Her bow danced across the strings, not following the corrupted notes, but improvising, weaving a counter-melody that began to subtly correct the orchestra's discordant path. She played with a passion she rarely allowed herself to show in public, her fingers flying, her body swaying with the music. The initial harshness of the orchestra began to soften, drawn by the sheer force of her artistry. She was not just playing, she was reclaiming the cadenza, bending it back to its intended form, infusing it with a raw, defiant beauty. The ton, initially confused, fell silent. Their whispers died. Eyes that had been critical now widened in astonishment. The music, under Seraphina's impromptu leadership, began to transform. The awkward accelerando smoothed into a graceful flow. The mournful clamor softened into a poignant, yearning melody that swelled with an unexpected strength. It was no longer just the Castlewood cadenza. It was Seraphina's cadenza, a testament to her resilience and her profound talent. Julian watched, mesmerized. His initial concern had given way to awe. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unwavering conviction in her movements. This was not the quiet, unassuming cousin. This was an artist, a force of nature, breathing life into a composition that had been almost destroyed. He saw the true spirit of the cadenza, and in it he saw Seraphina. The music reached its crescendo, a powerful, soaring declaration of hope and enduring love, ending not with a whimper, but with a triumphant, resonant chord that echoed through the ballroom. When the final note faded, a stunned silence hung in the air, followed by a single, tentative clap, then another, and then the entire ballroom erupted into thunderous applause, a wave of appreciation that washed over Seraphina, drowning out the lingering echoes of Clarissa's sabotage. Lady Thistlewick, scribbling furiously from her vantage point, had already begun to compose her next dispatch. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles, a cadenza of controversy and triumph. My dear readers, the Yuletide Ball at Castlewood has just witnessed a spectacle unlike any other. The much-anticipated Castlewood cadenza, composed by the quiet Lady Seraphina Beaumont, began with a most perplexing and discordant flourish, leading many to believe the amateur composer had, alas, overreached. However, in a stunning display of impromptu artistry, Lady Seraphina herself seized the moment, transforming the faltering performance into a breathtaking triumph. One wonders if a certain accident to the sheet music was merely a coincidence, or a deliberate attempt to sabotage the young lady's debut. Regardless, the quiet cousin has certainly proven she possesses a spirit far from wilting. The Earl of Castlewood, one notes, watched with an expression of profound admiration. Indeed, the melody of this season grows ever more intriguing. The applause was deafening, a roaring wave that crashed over Seraphina. She stood on the dais, her chest heaving, the violin still clutched in her hand. Faces in the crowd were blurred, but she could feel their collective awe, their admiration. It was a sensation she had rarely experienced, a validation that went beyond polite society. Then, through the sea of faces, she saw Julian. He was striding purposefully towards the dais, his eyes fixed solely on her. The Dowager Countess stood beside Clarissa, both wearing expressions of stunned disbelief, their faces pale beneath their rouge. Julian reached the edge of the dais and extended a hand to Seraphina. "Lady Seraphina," he said, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the lingering applause. "That was magnificent, truly extraordinary." He pulled her gently from the dais, his hand warm and firm on hers. Before Seraphina could properly respond, Clarissa, her face a mask of barely suppressed fury, pushed past the Dowager Countess and rushed forward. "Magnificent?" she scoffed, her voice sharp, though she attempted to keep it low enough to appear discreet. "Julian, you cannot be serious. The performance was a disaster." Lady Seraphina clearly lost her way, and then she interfered with the orchestra. It was an unprofessional display, a complete embarrassment. The Dowager Countess, recovering her composure, nodded vehemently. "Clarissa is quite right, Julian. Such a display. It lacked all decorum. A countess, my dear boy, must embody grace and composure, not wild improvisation." Her gaze was icy as it swept over Seraphina. Julian turned to Clarissa, his expression hardening. "On the contrary, Clarissa, Lady Seraphina saved the performance. There was a discrepancy in the music. She corrected it with a brilliance I have rarely witnessed." His eyes narrowed, a silent challenge in their depths. "Perhaps you were too preoccupied with your own enjoyment to notice the subtleties, cousin." Clarissa's jaw tightened. Subtleties? It was a shambles. And for her to take over the orchestra like some common street performer. "She is a musician of exceptional talent," Julian interrupted, his voice firm, "and she showed remarkable presence of mind, a quality, I might add, that is far more valuable than mere adherence to convention." He turned back to Seraphina, his hand still holding hers, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "Lady Seraphina, your performance was not merely a display of skill, It was a testament to your courage and your artistry. I am deeply grateful." Seraphina felt a warmth spread through her, chasing away the last vestiges of her despair. "Thank you, my lord," she managed, her voice a little breathless. His unwavering support, offered so publicly, meant more than any accolade. The Dowager Countess, seeing the direction of Julian's attention, stepped forward, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "Julian, this is hardly the time for such effusions. Clarissa is here. The Tun is watching. You must consider your position." Julian, however, ignored his mother, his gaze still locked with Seraphina's. "My position, mother," he said, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear, "is precisely where I wish it to be." He then turned to the assembled guests, his voice rising, clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed not merely the debut of the Castlewood Cadenza, but the unveiling of a truly extraordinary talent. Lady Seraphina Beaumont has, tonight, proven herself to be a woman of unparalleled artistry and remarkable spirit." A ripple went through the crowd, whispers erupted, but this time they were not of scandal, but of admiration and surprise. Clarissa's face was a mask of barely concealed rage, her carefully constructed facade cracking. Julian then did something that sent another shockwave through the ballroom. He raised Seraphina's hand, still clasped in his, and brought it to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her knuckles. "Lady Seraphina," he murmured, his eyes holding hers, "you have brought true music back to Castlewood, and in doing so, you have brought something else back to me." The meaning was unmistakable. A collective gasp, louder than any applause, filled the ballroom. The Dowager Countess looked as if she might faint. Clarissa let out a strangled sound of disbelief. Seraphina's heart soared. It was a public declaration, a bold rejection of expectation, and a profound affirmation of his feelings for her. Her Cinderella moment, not with a glass slipper, but with the notes of a defiant waltz. Lady Thistlewick, ever the keenest observer of the Tun's most dramatic turns, wasted no time in preparing her most sensational bulletin yet. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles. The Earl's shocking revelation. My dear readers, if you thought the Yuletide Ball would merely be a festive affair, you were sorely mistaken. Following a most peculiar, and some say deliberately sabotaged, performance of the Castlewood Cadenza, the quiet Lady Seraphina Beaumont delivered a stunning musical triumph, silencing all critics. But the true shock came when Lord Ashworth, the Jilted Earl himself, publicly lauded Lady Seraphina, defending her honor against none other than the dazzling Lady Clarissa Beaumont. And then, dear readers, he kissed her hand. A public display of affection, a clear declaration of favor, and a resounding rejection of his former fiancée. One can only imagine the Dowager Countess's apoplexy. It seems the Earl's heart has been swayed not by gold and glitter, but by the quiet, defiant melody of a true artist. The Ashworth affair, it seems, has taken a most unexpected and utterly delightful turn. Castlewood indeed has a new tune playing. The ball continued, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. All eyes were now on Seraphina and Julian, the quiet musician and the stoic Earl, whose bond had been forged in the crucible of music and defiance. The future of Castlewood, and their hearts, now lay open, resonating with the beautiful, bold notes of the cadenza. The aftermath of Julian's public declaration was a whirlwind of hushed conversations, scandalized gasps, and the palpable tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. The Dowager Countess, having regained a semblance of her formidable composure, immediately whisked Clarissa away, their departure from the ballroom a hasty, almost undignified retreat. Clarissa's face, usually so artfully composed, was a mask of furious disbelief, her eyes darting between Julian and Seraphina with venomous intent. Julian, however, seemed entirely oblivious to the social earthquake he had just caused. His gaze remained fixed on Seraphina, a soft, almost tender light in his usually stern eyes. He led her away from the throng, towards a quieter alcove adorned with winter greenery, his hand still gently clasping hers. "Are you quite well, Lady Seraphina?" he asked, his voice low, filled with genuine concern. That was a trying moment. Seraphina felt a blush creep up her neck. "I am well, my lord, though I confess I did not anticipate such drama." She managed a small, shaky laugh. "Nor such a public display of favor." Julian's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "Perhaps it was overdue. I have spent too long allowing others to dictate my path and my heart. Your courage tonight, Lady Seraphina, was a stark reminder of what truly matters." He squeezed her hand. "The cadenza. It was magnificent. You were magnificent." Before Seraphina could properly respond, Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont, her mother, hurried towards them, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Seraphina, my dear child, are you quite all right? What a commotion! And Lord Julian, such a bold statement." Julian released Seraphina's hand and bowed politely to Eleanor. "Mrs. Beaumont, I assure you, Lady Seraphina is quite unharmed, and I stand by every word. Indeed, I hope to make my intentions even clearer in the coming days." His gaze returned to Seraphina, a silent promise in their depths. Eleanor's eyes widened, then softened as she caught the unspoken understanding between them. "Oh, my dear," she murmured to Seraphina, a tear glistening in her eye. "Your father would be so proud." The following morning, Castlewood Manor felt strangely quiet. Clarissa and the Dowager Countess had departed at dawn, their departure a swift, silent affair, leaving behind only the lingering scent of Clarissa's expensive perfume and the faint echo of the Dowager's furious whispers. Julian sought Seraphina out in the music room, where she was, once again, at the piano, softly playing a passage from the cadenza. He entered without preamble, his expression serious, but with a newfound lightness in his step. "Lady Seraphina," he began, "we must speak." Seraphina turned, her heart fluttering. "My lord?" He walked towards her, stopping directly in front of the piano. "Last night I spoke from the heart. I meant every word. Your talent, your spirit, your unwavering authenticity, they have captivated me. I have spent too long seeking a match of convenience, a union that would satisfy societal expectations and my mother's ambitions. But I have learned, through you, that true harmony cannot be forced." He reached out, taking her hands in his. "I know my mother will object. I know society will whisper, and Lady Thistlewick will have a field day. But I no longer care. I care only for this." He gestured between them, to the music, to the unspoken connection that vibrated in the air. "Lady Seraphina, I wish to offer you my hand, not out of duty, not out of convenience, but out of a profound and growing affection. Will you do me the honor of becoming my countess?" Seraphina's breath caught. It was everything she had dreamed of, yet dared not hope for. The quiet girl, the music tutor's daughter, offered the hand of an earl. But it was not just the title. It was Julian, his sincerity, his vulnerability, his willingness to defy the world for her. "Julian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you certain?" "The Dowager Countess, Clarissa." He smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. "Let them rage. Let Lady Thistlewick write her scandalous columns. My heart has found its true note, Seraphina, and it is with you." Lady Thistlewick, of course, was already working overtime. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles, An engagement most unconventional. My dear readers, prepare for the most astonishing news of the season. Following his shocking public display at the Yuletide Ball, Lord Ashworth has, one hears, offered his hand to none other than the quiet, musical Lady Seraphina Beaumont. Yes, the same Lady Seraphina, whose gown was so tragically damaged and whose musical talents so dramatically saved the Castlewood cadenza from utter ruin. The Dowager Countess, one can only imagine, is in a state of utter apoplexy, while Lady Clarissa Beaumont has, quite understandably, fled Castlewood in a cloud of furious indignation. It seems the Earl has chosen love over lineage, harmony over hierarchy. This author, for one, applauds such a bold and romantic defiance. The whispers will be deafening, dear readers, but the melody of true love, it seems, has finally found its triumphant chord at Castlewood. The engagement of Lord Julian Ashworth to Lady Seraphina Beaumont sent shockwaves through the ton. Lady Thistlewick's special edition, proclaiming an engagement most unconventional, became the most sought-after publication in London, devoured with equal parts scandalized delight and grudging admiration. The Dowager Countess, true to Julian's prediction, retired to her country estate, citing a sudden onset of vapors and refusing to acknowledge the engagement. Clarissa, meanwhile, had retreated to the continent, her pride wounded beyond repair. Despite the societal uproar, Julian and Seraphina found a quiet joy in their shared future. Julian, freed from the oppressive weight of his mother's expectations, seemed to shed years from his countenance. He laughed more freely. His eyes, once so guarded, now shone with an open affection for Seraphina. He took a genuine interest in her musical pursuits, often joining her in the music room, sometimes playing the cello, sometimes simply listening, his presence a comforting anchor. Seraphina, in turn, blossomed. The quiet wallflower began to find her voice, not just in music, but in conversation. Julian encouraged her opinions, sought her counsel on estate matters, and treated her not merely as his fiancée, but as his equal. Her modest gowns were replaced by elegant but never ostentatious ensembles, chosen by Eleanor, who beamed with pride at her daughter's happiness. Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont, ever the pragmatist, offered her gentle advice. "You have won his heart, Seraphina, but a marriage is a composition in itself. It requires patience, understanding, and a willingness to adapt to the discordant notes as well as the harmonious ones." "I understand, Mama," Seraphina replied, smiling, "and I believe Julian and I are well practiced in navigating discord." The wedding was a smaller affair than Julian's initial engagement to Clarissa would have been, a deliberate choice by the couple. It was held at Castlewood, a testament to their love for the estate and a quiet defiance of the ton's expectations. Many of their friends and well-wishers attended, including a surprisingly large contingent of those who had admired Seraphina's performance at the ball, drawn by the genuine romance of their story. As Seraphina walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with a melody more profound than any she had ever composed. Julian stood at the altar, his eyes alight as he watched her approach. His smile, a rare and precious thing, was entirely for her. The vows were exchanged, simple words that held the weight of a lifetime of promise. As Julian placed the ring on her finger, a symbol of their unbreakable bond, Seraphina felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She was no longer just the music tutor's daughter, no longer merely a quiet cousin. She was Julian's wife, the Countess of Castlewood, and, most importantly, his true partner. At the wedding breakfast, Julian raised a glass. "To my Countess," he said, his gaze sweeping over Seraphina, who brought not just music, but true harmony back to Castlewood. He then turned to the guests, a playful glint in his eye. "And to Lady Thistlewick, without whom, perhaps, our story would not have been quite so well documented. A ripple of laughter went through the room, and even Lady Thistlewick, who was, of course, present, though discreetly tucked away in a corner, scribbling furiously, offered a rare, almost imperceptible smile. Years passed. Castlewood Manor flourished under Julian and Seraphina's shared stewardship. The Dowager Countess eventually returned, her initial frostiness slowly thawing in the face of her son's undeniable happiness and Seraphina's quiet grace. She never fully relinquished her ambition, but she learned to appreciate the genuine affection that bound her son to his wife. Seraphina continued to compose, her music now filled with the joy and depth of her life with Julian. The Castlewood cadenza became a beloved piece, played at every ball, a reminder of the night a quiet musician defied expectations and found her true love. Their children, a son and a daughter, inherited their parents' love for music, filling the manor with laughter and the sweet, sometimes discordant, sounds of childhood melodies. Lady Thistlewick's chronicles continued to document the lives of the ton, but her reports on the Ashworths became increasingly infrequent, filled with admiring accounts of their harmonious marriage and Seraphina's continued musical triumphs. Lady Thistlewick's Chronicles, a harmonious union. My dear readers, it gives this author immense pleasure to report that the most unconventional union of Lord Julian Ashworth and Lady Seraphina Beaumont has proven to be a resounding success. The Earl, once so stoic, is now a picture of contentment, and his Countess, the former quiet musician, has blossomed into a lady of remarkable grace and influence. Their home, Castlewood Manor, is a beacon of happiness, filled with the joyous sounds of music and laughter. It seems, dear readers, that sometimes the quietest melodies are the most enduring, and true love, when it finds its perfect harmony, creates a symphony that lasts forever. Indeed, a most delightful conclusion to the Ashworth affair, though one always awaits the next intriguing note. And so, Lady Seraphina, the music tutor's daughter, found her true place, not just as the Countess of Castlewood, but as the beloved partner of a man who saw her for her true worth, and whose life, like her cadenza, had finally found its perfect, enduring harmony. For more such delightful revelations and true love romance, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel.